Right now, we want to bring in Jim Walsh. He is the GOP chairman, joining us live to talk more about this, the No Kings Day. There's been a lot of conversation over what a lot of people in the GOP are saying, that this is a hate America rally. So what is your take on what we just heard from Pramila Jayapal right there, and also your take on today's No Kings rally?
Well, a lot. Representative Jayapal is a character. Mm-hmm. It was good to hear her read from the Declaration of Independence, a document it sounds like she just recently discovered. That was good. She was talking about Republicans. She sounded a little bit like a Republican there. Of course, Madison, this is not our No Kings Day. Our No Kings Day is July 4th. We celebrate not having kings on the 4th of July, on Independence Day. What this event is a well-orchestrated, carefully organized corporate action. Most of the major supporters of the organizations, it's kind of a network of groups that are putting this protest series on, are very much corporate tools. As is pretty widely known, the currency speculator George Soros and his network of lobbying groups and special interest groups are deeply involved in these events. And, you know, more power to them. First Amendment, it's their right to work the system as they please. And we celebrate the First Amendment and free speech and free assembly here in Washington. It is interesting, though, to think that the only wannabe tyrants and wannabe authoritarians are in D.C. We have a few of them here in our state, in Olympia. And so we try to concentrate a little bit closer to home on defending some of the things that Representative Jayapal talked about there in her campaign speech. You know, individual liberty, the power of the people. Our state constitution says so clearly right at the beginning that all political power is inherent in the people, and that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Mm-hmm. And then our state constitution goes on to say, and those governments exist to protect and maintain individual rights. That's maybe where we and Representative Jayapal diverge a little bit. We're interested in individual rights, and Representative Jayapal is much more into identity politics and group rights. And that's where I think she starts to lose the thread.
Yeah, and we were just seeing her speak in front of this crowd, really the last speaker to gather up that support, to have everyone follow her as they continue to march through the streets of Seattle. I know today you were saying you support, you know, free speech and support these, not maybe what their, you know, message is.
But the right to say it.
Right, exactly.
The right to say it.
And so I think that's important to note. Do you know of any Republicans joining these rallies, or, you know, anybody in your circle here?
We had a few I guess you would call them counter protesters, a few people who, some of your viewers may have seen it in social media or somewhere, where their focus is on our governor, who has some authoritarian impulses of his own, and they made a poster up with the governor wearing a crown and a slash through it, and they were going to show up at some of the rallies basically to say, we agree with you about no kings, let's look a little closer to home about politicians who would be kings. I think at the end, if we focus here on is the fact that we are a republic. And I was glad to hear the Congresswoman refer to our nation as a republic. That's what it is. Then it's all to the good. I mean, we can have some disagreement about the particulars of this personality or that one, but if we can agree that our nation is a nation of laws, our nation is a republic, then I think we've got some points at which we can work together to the common good.
And we are hearing House Speaker Mike Johnson call today's rally. Many other GOP lawmakers and leaders are calling this a hate America rally. Do you agree with that statement?
Hate is such a strong word, and frankly, I think it's overused in political circles. But this is true. This is where Johnson and I absolutely agree. As I've said, one of the main funders and backers and supporters of these efforts is the currency speculator Soros. And he's quite an older guy now, but he's got a network of people around him, including his own son, who runs his operation. Their billions come from currency speculation. Famously, Soros shorted the British pound a few decades ago and made a bunch of money betting against the British pound at that point in time. You always have to watch these currency speculators because they can make a great deal of money betting against different countries' currencies, and then they have an incentive to sort of create chaos in that country, not to end the country, but to create enough disturbance that the country's currency falls in value relative to other countries' currencies. That's how these speculators make money. And there's some of that going on kind of behind the scenes with these protests. Be aware. I mean, again, it's their right to free speech and assembly. They can say what they will, but let's keep our eyes open about some of the agendas behind the speaker's podium here that are at work. So I don't know if I would call it hate, but it certainly is trying to create discord. You heard the congresswoman talk about Republican this, Republican that. I don't think issues of freedom and liberty in our republic are Republican or Democrat. There's no need to make this a partisan thing. We agree on a lot of these points. The partisanship, the rancor, that serves the purpose of those who may be making investment positions against the US dollar. So I know it sounds a little conspiratorial, but this is where the Soros organization makes a lot of its money, on these hedge fund positions, bets, investments on nations' currencies, including our own dollar.
And I know we were, speaking earlier, and we also had you earlier in the show speaking on immigration and the need for, on this Democratic side to have some calm conversations over there's not going to be any militarization in Washington right now. We've seen steps from our state and city leaders to make sure that doesn't happen. What's your take right now? I just would like to revisit the conversation Sharon you had with you about immigration, and specifically what Jayapal was speaking about, saying that this is an authoritarian regime coming in to remove people from their families, and your take on what she was saying.
Well, she also rightly referenced our country, our nation, as a nation of laws, which it is. That includes our immigration law. Now, immigration is primarily a federal government matter. The federal government is charged with both defining our immigration policy and enforcing our immigration policy. It's important that we recognize, though, that federal system of law around immigration applies here in Washington. Even though it's primarily a federal responsibility, our state apparatus, our state government, our state law enforcement must, under standard federal law and the theory of the supremacy clause in federal government and federal constitution and federal statutory law, it rules. It's the highest law of the land. And if our state tries to undermine or break federal immigration law, our state is in a bad position. And it exposes our state to civil lawsuits, to even possibly criminal lawsuits, and to some financial impacts if federal funds are held back. So we need to be smart about how we handle immigration policy here. Another point I want to make in our discussion about immigration is some people blur the distinction between legal, lawful immigration, which we all want and encourage, and illegal immigration. That is coming into this country illegally, without a visa, without a work permit, without anything, sneaking in. There's a difference, and it's critical to our discussions in our public policy, between legal immigrants to this country, which we want, and illegal aliens who sneak into this country, which we don't want. And Representative Jayapal and Governor Ferguson and our State Attorney General, Mr. Brown, confuse and conflate the distinction between lawful legal immigration and illegal immigration. Our federal law is clear on this, and illegal aliens are here. They've broken the law to come into this country and are rightly deported, if they can be apprehended, and sent back to wherever they came from. That's enforcing our righteous law, and a good thing. Some of the rhetoric here is, well, we're going to disregard that law. That's not a good idea. We need to follow our republic's laws.
Yeah, and thank you for expanding on that. We had an interview with Jim Walsh in our immigration story, so if you would like to look more into that, just go to our website, king5.com. One more question to wrap up our conversation here. Just kind of overall looking at the rallies happening across the country right now, what would the GOP's response, specifically here in Washington, be to the criticisms of the fabric of the No Kings rally, which is no authoritarian leader, no leadership that's a king? What would the response be for those criticisms, and how do you re-emphasize this balance of power?
Well, there's definitely a sort of element of sore loserness to some of these protests. The current president, Mr. Trump, was properly, legitimately elected president by a majority of the voters in the country by a fairly wide margin at the last election. Now, you can dislike Trump if you want, but to call him a king is simply not accurate. Now, does he do some things you don't agree with? That's fine. And we even heard in the representative's speech, she was hedging away a little bit from the king's rhetoric and talking more about specific things he did she doesn't like, but that's a different conversation. And we don't have kings in this country. We haven't since 1776. A lot of the current sort of heartburn that's going on back in D.C., especially around this shutdown, the federal government shutdown, has more to do with the legislative branch of government. That is the Congress, and particularly the U.S. Senate back in D.C., fighting over the continuing resolution, the spending bill. And it has less to do with the executive branch. The president is kind of a player in it, but the main point of discord around this continuing resolution is particularly in the U.S. Senate. That's where the real problem or bottleneck is occurring. So to blame this on the executive is just not right. I mean, that doesn't understand civics. It's a legislative issue. And I've got to say before we end, the federal government hasn't passed a proper budget in 20 years. Out of D.C., we've been using these temporary Band-Aid agreements, continuing resolutions they're called, spending bills that aren't proper budgets. And I think a lot of the shutdown agitation has to do with the fact that D.C. isn't negotiating and voting in proper budgets. If they get back to doing that the right way, I think we'll not see as much of this continuing resolution shutdown drama. So I would encourage everyone back in D.C., including Representative Jayapal and our U.S. senators from this state, stop it with the Band-Aid spending plans. Let's negotiate a proper budget which is less susceptible to the shutdowns.